Hi and welcome to a new tutorial. In this one, we're just going to be going through how to handle login and sign up using Django. Now, if you're familiar with a package called Django AllAuth, then this tutorial might not seem as relevant as it should because you might just be thinking, well, if Django AllAuth can handle login for me, then why should I ever even think about it? And so the answer to that is simply just if you wanted to create something that is slightly more customized or suits the needs that you need very specifically, then building it from scratch is pretty much your only other option. And so this is why it is actually important to know how this works. So what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through how to actually set this up. I'm just going to create a basic view and we're going to see how we can work with authenticated users. So I've got a Django project that is already set up here. All I've done is just started the project. I've got no apps. I've just made the migrations and I'm working in Visual Studio Code. Again, you can work in any editor you want. And so if I just list everything out here, let's just run the server. Cool, so everything is running there. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the DJ users, which is our project directory. I'm just going to create a new file here and call it views.py. And this is actually going to be the views file. It might seem weird to put that actual file inside the project directory, but we're just doing this because we don't need to actually handle an app or create an app to do this. And so all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say from Django.shortcuts import render. So we've just got that render method. And then I'm just going to define, let's call it home, takes a request in, and I'm just going to return a render of that request. And let's say it goes to home.html. And we'll pass in an empty dictionary as the context. And so now we want to make this view some kind of protected view that only authenticated users can actually use. And so this would use what we call a decorator. So if we go and just search for this, it's called the login required decorator. So let's just search for that. And we want the one for Django. So here it is there. So Django contrib.auth.decorators. So let's just copy that and we'll say from that import login required. So from Django contrib auth decorators import login required, and then above the view a decorator is just applied by saying at and then the name of the decorator. So this pretty much does exactly what it says it does. It makes this view require authenticated users. So it's quite a nice shortcut method for us that handles a lot of that. And so now all we need to do is just test this out. So we've already got that running. Let's just take this view and bring it into our URLs here. So we'll just import this relatively, and we'll just import home there. And I'm just going to put it to the local host and just say home just like that. So now if we actually visit our local host, let's see, now it's telling us, one, you can see it's already redirecting us there. And notice how it's giving the URL path as accounts/login. We didn't define that. That was actually thanks to the decorator. So you can see that it basically just redirected us to that path. And then it said question mark next. And next is just a parameter saying that once we've logged in, re-navigate or redirect us back to the URL /. Obviously, there is no method yet to handle the login, so that's what we're going to actually do now. So let's just close some of that off. And what I'm going to do is just close the server here, and we're going to create an app. So we're going to say python manage.py start app, and let's call this account, so that we can see our accounts app is created. And we just need to import this in our settings. So let's go down, add accounts in our settings, so inside installed apps. And so now we're going to work inside our accounts app, and we're going to need to create a forms.py file. And inside this file is where we're going to create two very important forms, which are the login form and the register form. Now the reason why we need to create these forms is simply because forms are the way that we capture user data, and so the form is going to be our own custom way of actually achieving that. So to get started with that, we're going to need to import Django's forms. So we just say from Django import forms. And so now let's start with creating the first form. They're both class-based forms. So we say class, and the first one we'll call the user login form. And this is going to be a form, so coming from forms Django's imported forms, not a model form. And this form is going to have two fields. So obviously, if we are logging in, we need a username and we need a password. Obviously, there are different ways that you can achieve this. Maybe you want to put an email and a password, but we'll just do it as a username and a password, but it's essentially the same thing. So we'll say username equals to forms, and this is going to be a character field. And then we say the password equals to forms.character field as well, but this time we pass in a specific widget that allows it to be viewed as a password. So we say widget, and this is forms.password input. Notice how this is being prompted to me. So if I say enter there, this password input is essentially treating this field as a password text input. That's essentially what it's doing. Now, when this form is actually used, we can pass a specific method on the class, which is the clean method. Now, the clean method is applied every time the form is submitted, and it essentially is just a way of ensuring that the data being passed in is what you want it to be. So we can do this manually. So we'll say this takes in self args, and it takes keyword args, basically ensuring everything is being passed in. And we're going to get the actual data that was passed in, so that is the username and the password. And the way that we do that is just by calling the self.cleaned data and then say .get, and we get the name of the field that we want to get. So we want to get the username, so we say .get username, and then we say password is pretty much the same thing. So self.cleaned data, and we say .get password. Now here's where we'll want to do some kind of check. So we'll say if there's a username and password, then authenticate it. So check that this user actually exists and the password matches the username. Otherwise, if that doesn't work, then raise some kind of error. So we'll do exactly that. We'll say if username and password, so both were actually filled in. And here we need to bring in a method that is already handled by Django, which is the authenticate method. And so we'll need to import this. So we'll say from django.contrib.auth import, and this is the authenticate method. So just like that. And this does pretty much what it says it does. It authenticates a user. So it takes in two fields, the username and the password. So what we'll do is we'll just say the user equals to, and then we pass authenticate, and we say the username equals to that username, and the password equals to the password. So now that user either is true or false. So we'll say if not user, so it's undefined, then we'll say raise, and here we want to call a validation error. So this is the way that you can actually call some kind of error to display on the form that Django actually handles for us. So we say forms.validation error, and in here we say this user does not exist. And then we can check for another type of error, which is if the password that was inputted was the wrong password. So we just say if the user.check password and then pass in that password, if this is not correct, so meaning the password that was entered was not the right password for this user, but the user does exist, then we can raise another error. So we'll just copy this exact line here, and we'll say incorrect password. And then lastly, we can do another thing, which is just checking if that user is actually active. So this .isActive is one of the properties on the default user in Django. So we can again raise an error to say this user is not active. And then lastly, after all those checks, so meaning the user was actually authenticated, then we have to call the super method. And the super method essentially is a special method that is applied on a class and is very similar to the object manager on an object. I'll put in a link to explain what the super method does, because it's quite tricky if you've never seen this before. But essentially it just takes in the user login form and self, and then we say just .clean, and we pass in basically everything that was passed in the beginning. And this method is actually extremely important. If you don't put this in, it's not going to work. But thankfully that actually is it. That is the login form. Next would be the sign up form. So or register form. So we'll say user register form. Again, this is coming from forms, but this time we can actually make this a model form. And the reason why I'm making it a model form is because the model that we specify can be the default user that is being set by Django. So to actually access that user, we need to import a method to get hold of it. And so we'll just come up to the top here. This is also from Django's contrib.auth. So we'll actually just make this an import like this. And we'll need to import the get user model method. And so what this does is it allows us to actually get that user method that is being used currently. So if you're using your own custom user, you can still actually call this method, and then it will get the user model that you have custom defined, which is quite handy. Instead of actually just importing the user from Django's contrib.auth, this is a much better approach. And so then we'll take that and actually use that as the model for our register form. So when you register, there's going to be 3 fields. And this is just going to be my own custom way of doing it. You can obviously do it slightly differently as well. But what I'm going to do is make it 2 emails and only 1 password. So the emails that you enter have to verify, they have to be the same, and the password is only inputted once. But because the model that we're specifying is the user model that's defined by default in Django, that user has specific properties, such as the username and the email and the password. So that's why we don't need to pass in the username directly as one of the fields here. So what I'm going to do is just specify the email here as an email field, and I'm going to give it a label. So this will actually show on the form, and I'm going to say email address. And then I'm going to copy that and call this email2 and say confirm email. And then lastly, I will add a password, which is again a character field that has a widget, and the widget is the password input. And then we'll just specify class meta so that we can specify the model. And again, the model is the user. And then we need to actually specify the fields because we've made this a model form. So this is a list of fields. And because we're using the default user model, then we can pass in username. We can pass in email. And then note this has to be email 2 because this is what we called it here. So that has to be consistent. And then password. So basically all the fields have to be specified here in this list, but you can override them by specifying the field above, just like I've done here. So this is why I'm saying that you do not need to repass username as one of the fields here. It's unnecessary. And then we will apply the clean method again. So we'll say define clean, and this I'm going to actually call clean email. And this again will take in self, and I'm going to get the email from the cleaned data. So we'll say cleaned data.get email, and then we'll say email2 is just getting the value of email2, and then lastly the password. And then we will check if the email, so email1 essentially, is equal to email2, and then we just need to check if those emails are the same. So we say if they're not the same, then we're going to raise a validation error. So we'll say forms.validation error, and we'll say emails must match. Otherwise, we'll check if the email that is being passed in, it already belongs to another user. So we'll say email query set equals to, and then we're going to grab the user objects, and we'll say filter them by the email field, and we say if that query set exists, then that means that there's someone that already has that email. So we can just say raise forms.validation error, and we'll just say this email is already being used. And then we will just return that email. And so now we just need to take these forms and actually bring them into our view. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these imports from the previous forms.py, and except now we need 2 more methods. We need the login method and we need the logout method. Now those methods will be used, well, to do what they say they do, to log in the user and to log out the user. And then we're going to need the shortcut method for render, and we'll actually just bring in redirect as well. And then lastly, we'll just need from forms import the login form and the register form. and we'll define a login view, and this will take in a request. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the value of next. Remember this I showed you in the beginning where there was a question mark and then next equal to a slash. Well, we can actually get that value of next to redirect the user. And I'm going to say the form equals to the login form because we're in the login view. And I'm going to say it's a request.post or none goes into this view, or into the form rather. And then I'll say if the form is valid. So if the form is valid, so after doing all the cleaning, then we're going to grab the username. This is going to come from form.cleanedData.get the username, and then we just do the same thing for the password. And then here we will want to authenticate the user again. So we'll say username equals to username and password equals to password. And the reason why we're doing that authenticate again is because we need to pass the authenticated user object into the login method. So we'll say login, pass in the request and the user. And then lastly, we'll just check if there was a next value. So there was a redirect that needed to take place. Then we will say return redirect to next. Otherwise, we will return redirect to slash. So by default. And we will display this all on, let's call it login.html. And we'll need to pass in some context here. So let's create a context and let's actually just scroll down. So context, and we'll say the form is the form. And actually that's all we need. So context goes inside there. And let's just actually run the server so we can see if we've got any mistakes so far. So everything is fine. We obviously just don't have these templates yet. So let's go into settings, and inside directories we'll say os.path.join the base directory with templates. Now we can close that, and we'll create another folder, and this folder will be called templates. This needs to go inside our source folder. In here I'll create login.html, and let's just put some default here, and we'll display the form inside a form element, and we'll set the method as post, put in our CSRF token, and then we'll just need an input here which will be of type submit, so that we can actually submit that form. And above that, let's just make this say login. And then we'll need to create home.html as well. So let's just create some HTML here, and we'll say this is the home page. So just like that, and we can close that off now. And so now we'll just need to take that view, so our login view, and actually bring this into one of our URLs. So we'll go to our project URLs, and we'll have to say from accounts.views import login view, and we'll say the path is accounts/login, and we'll pass in the login view. And now if we refresh this, let's see, are we getting an error? It says login is not defined, so views line 6, and that's because we didn't put a comma there. So let's just check if everything's working. We refresh this. Okay, so we get a form there, which is not being outputted correctly. And that's because there needs to be 2 curly braces. So let's just refresh this. There we go. So we get the username and the password. Now we'll need to create a super user so we can actually see this coming through. So let's just say create super user, and let's just run the server again so we can log into the admin. I'm actually going to do this in a separate incognito window. So let's just bring this over here, and we'll just go to the admin and log in. And so now that we can actually see that we have some users, so we have the admin user, so that's who I'll log in with now. So let's just put in my username, and we'll put in my password, and we say submit, and there we go, it takes us to the home page. So the login view is working. So let's just close that off. And next we'll work on the register view. So we'll take that form in now as well. And this one is actually pretty much the same thing as the login view. So what I'm going to do is actually just copy that entire view, and we'll just call this the register view. And all we need to do now is just make sure this is the register form. And instead, now what we do is just get rid of all of that there. And after we've actually confirmed the form is valid, then we need to get the user from that form. So we say form.save, and I'm going to say commit equals false. And the reason for this is because we need to set the password on the user. So what we do is we say password equals to form.cleanData.get the password as usual. And we want to say user.set password, and this takes in that password that we just got. And then we can say user.save. So this commit false is basically saying don't save it yet. And so, but we need to pass it the .save method so that we can actually save it from the form onto this object. And so lastly, we need to authenticate that user again. So we'll say the new user equals to, and I'm just going to grab that authenticate and say username equals to user.username, and password equals to password that we just got. And then we say log in the new user. We say if next, redirect to that next, otherwise redirect to /. We're passing in the form, and let's actually just make this signup.html. And so now we can go into our templates and add signup.html, add some templates here, and this again will have a method as post. We need to pass in the CSRF token, and then we need to pass in form and just the input to submit that as well. So type is submit. So we check if all of that's working, and it seems it is. And then we'll just need to bring that register view into our URLs. So we'll add another path here. We'll say path accounts/register and say it's the register view. And then lastly, we just need to add the logout view so that we can actually re-sign up and re-sign in, of course. So we'll say logout view, and this takes in the request. And this one is actually really, really intense. So we need to just call logout that request, and then just say just redirect it basically. So that was actually pretty intense. And once we've got that sorted, we can go into the URLs, and we just need to import that view as well. And we'll add a path in here, which is accounts and logout, and then just say logout view. So we check if that's all working, and it is. So let's actually just minimize that there, and we'll go to account logout. And basically what happened was that it logged us out, and it redirected us back to the URL that is /. And obviously, because we're not authenticated, it redirected us back to the login view. So let's go to login register. And here we see the form, we see username, email address, confirm email, password. Obviously, it's not very pretty, but this is when something like Django Crispy forms would come in. So let's just create a username. We'll just say Matt. Email address, we'll just say @gmail.com. Confirm that is the same. And actually, let's stuff that up just so that we can see if it didn't work. And we'll pass in a password as well. We say submit, and then it says emails must match. So notice that. So you can play around with the authentication to see all of those errors come up, but let's see if signing up works. Okay, so we're getting an issue with one of the emails not coming through on the clean email method. So instead we just changed this to the normal clean method, and instead of returning the email at the end, we are then returning a super call of the user register form and then saying .clean on the end of that. So with this, it then works. So let's just take a look at this again. So I'll just pass in some information here. We'll just say at info.com and we'll say a password there, click submit, and it redirects us to the home page. And then if we come in here and just refresh this, then we get the new user that is there. So it actually works in creating a user. So let's go and let's log out of there, and then let's log back into this and using that new user. And if we submit, then it takes us back to the home page. So all in all, it now works. So that is how you can just get started with setting up your own custom login methods or sign up methods. Another thing that you could also do is just add something that a lot of websites do now, which is a way of checking that the user is not some kind of bot. So you could put, for example, like a mathematical equation and say 3 plus 1 equals 2, and then they have to put in 4 and then validate that field and see if 4 was the answer that was put in, then allow the user to be logged in. So that's just some food for thought. All in all, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a comment down below and let us know if there's anything else that you want to see in relation to Django projects. There is a project coming out soon on the website. The website's link is in the description of this video. And so in that project, we'll be building a very complex blog with Bootstrap and Django. And we're going to go through the whole process of creating it from scratch and taking it live. So once that is released, I will update you as well. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.